the presentations today. Thank you all for a very illuminating presentation. And I would like to just make 2 points about today's topic. And this is the historical. I'll just leave it as a question so that I think this could initiate our discussion during Q&A. So I think what is fascinating about this Uige documents is the historical significance of record keeping. So the practice of record keeping during Joseon Dynasty, and especially its detailed accounts of it. And as you have all seen through the images and the video clip, it is very fascinating to see how detailed these documents illustrate the events of the royal ceremonies. And then also the second point is how the narrative of Uige documents combine writings and illustrations. And then as we move on into the early 20th century, as Semio's presentations has shown, it added a photography in constructing these narrative. And so if we put this in broader East Asian context, or even maybe in the global context, I think it'd be very fruitful to think about how distinctive this practice is, like the combination of writing and illustrations in creating these kind of royal documents, and also in constructing the narrative of these events during the Joseon Dynasty. I'll just leave it at that, and then I would like to, if you have any comments to make, I think you could elaborate a little bit more about this, and then we'll open up for Q&A.
I think we need to ask the audience to ask questions.
First, okay. All right. Any questions? Yes, please.
Given the James Burson from the Woodrow Wilson Center, where I direct the Hyundai Motor. Thanks, sir. James Burson from the Woodrow Wilson Center. I direct the Hyundai Motor Korea Foundation Center for Korean History and Public Policy there. We gather a lot of documents from international archives about modern Korean history because, sadly, when you go to ROK archives, really you find more foreign materials than you do Korean materials. When you do find materials in Korean, oftentimes they're translations of the New York Times or articles. Pretty sad. What I'm interested in your thoughts on this, given the importance of record keeping in the Joseon Dynasty. What explains this variation? Question number one. Another question, Doctor, you described or you mentioned how there is one of the books preserved in I think it was the British Library. And are there any theories as to how this actually got there? And have there been efforts to get it back, or is it just hoping for the goodwill of the British people to return it? Thank you.
The second question was for me, right? You wanted to know how these Uige books are now being kept in different places. Is that
specifically so I know the French books have been returned on loan, but they're still in Britain. There's still one, I think, one book. Are there any theories how that did get there, and have there been any efforts to persuade the British to get it back?
Okay. The ones kept that had been kept at BNF in French National Library was taken to taken to France in 1866, and we've shown you the invasion and the sack of the library and so on. But the fact is that as soon as the books were taken to France, they were accessioned by the National Library of France. And once it goes into the National Library in any country, it cannot be de-accessioned in any reason, for any reason. So when we got these things in May of 2011, after so many years of negotiation, we do not have the ownership of them. The French returned them on condition of 5 years of renewable loan. So they were happy to see the storage facilities at the National Museum, which was newly built 10 years ago. Everyone who sees the storage at the National Museum in Seoul will be really impressed. And so the Uyghur books are now being kept there, and the French was really happy to see the facility, and gladly they loaned them to us, but not the ownership. The ownership has not been transferred. And we've studied a great deal about the treaties between the countries, mostly the stolen objects during the war. Prior to the 1970s, when the UNESCO, I forgot exactly what it was told, but we had so many sessions while we were negotiating the return of the Uyghur books with France. The objects stolen or taken before 1970s are very difficult to get back. So it is through the goodwill of whoever has those things that it goes to the original country, but we cannot force them. And the one copy that's in the British Library went there sometime during the early 20th century. And Professor Lee Tae-jin of Seoul National University traced the transaction, and the British Library has the record of how much it was sold to the by the individual to the library. But as I say, it was before the 1970s. But so we cannot really claim it. It's a private property and then national property of Britain. So that's why we cannot get it back. Is that enough? Okay.
Is Uyghur a really unique form of recording rights in Korea, or do other countries like China in particular or Japan have the same or similar form of recording rights?
Who will answer? Everybody point to me.
In one of Professor Youngman's slides, there are very similar forms from China.
Yes,
Okay.
When, of course, Uyghur is Chinese characters. I'm wondering whether China is the same word, if they have similar mode of recording.
no, not that I would know. Is this on? Yes. Not that I would want know, but I think these two ladies know better than I do. What I think we all tried to trace in a way what models there might have been, and what I tried to demonstrate was that there were a number of inspirations, and it would all put together and creatively invented in Korea. That's my impression. But as far as I know, there is no such term for such historical documents in any other country in East Asia. Am I right? Yes. So it's really uniquely Korean, and that's why I talked about characteristics and peculiarities, because it's really something very, very Choson. Not even Korean in terms of the whole history, but very, very Choson in terms of Korean society, ideas about society, politics, lineage, family lineage, ideas about education. All of that goes in there in some kind of institutionalization you do not find anywhere else, in my impression.
Okay, let me just add a few more words. The term Uigwe can be found in Japanese Buddhist context. During the Heian period, when they imported the esoteric Buddhism, they had to write down the rituals because it was so complicated. So they made something called Uigwe. But in any other historical context, Japan did not have the kind of record we have called Uigwe. And in China, the official events were recorded in papers called Tang-an. Tang-an in Korean pronunciation. And some people now begin to do a lot of research on these Chinese official records, but they are not bound in book forms, and they are just piled up as paper in sheets of paper in libraries. And there are some illustrations, but not the kind of illustrations we have. And the illustrations Professor Jungmann showed us are all from printed books, not Uigwe, not any specific Uigwe. So it is very unique in Korea.
Thanks for our very educational morning. I have a question. What are the conventional rules that dictate the illustration of the Uigwe? Because the Koreans were very familiar with the conventions of perspective. And why is it that the pictures are drawn in such an unusual way, with one half of the picture looking one way, one half being flat the other way? What dictates the conventions? Do we know? Do we have an explanation for these conventions?
Well, maybe we know that from maps. I was trying to point out the similarities with diagrams, but Korean maps are often very similar in that you have mountains on, let's say you have a map of Seoul.
My question is related to the processions. And
yes, I know.
When you see people flat on one side, it's very strange. You don't expect it.
Yes, it's the same structure. In maps, you have also the mountains pointing to the upper side, and those to the side down, and also to the left and right. And the idea often in East Asian painting is that you don't look into a certain scene from the outside, but you're inside the scene. And we have, for instance, in Japan, there is a long scroll of a river where you have the sides of the river, one side up and the other side down. And that's a painting, it's not even a map. So, and I know from, I think it's 14th, 15th century in Germany, Nuremberg, there's also a map which has also the mountains around the city shown in different directions. So it could be turned around. They had a mechanism there. So it's not that unusual. It's just not our, from what we developed from the Renaissance onward was this peep box view. I mean, this looking onto a stage from the outside. That's a special perspective we have in photography, but it's not the only one. You look into the world, so it's unusual, but it's not that unusual. I'm not sure whether it.
What it means is that there are soldiers looking in different directions, and orderly. They are very individualized.
The individual.
Yeah, but why are they not very orderly?
Clarification.
I don't want to monopolize the time, but when I went to Taipei the first time to the National Museum, I was very impressed by these huge scrolls describing the cities of China, and there was perspective for a scroll that was 12 meters long. So I'm wondering why in the Uruguay, to repeat, the soldiers are flat on one side. You cannot even look at them, if you like. Yeah. And so that's your only explanation, that they are looked at from the inside.
We had a Picasso at the time.
I'd like to add something on Professor Jungmann's answer, but I trust my speaking English, so I asked Professor Ji-Soo Kim for some help. Do you still remembering my request? So I speak first in Korean. 의궤의 반차도는 의궤에 그려지기 전에 그 행사 준비 과정에서 실제 현장에서 실무자들이 실제 현장에서 줄을 세울 때 사용하였던 그림들이었습니다.
So the panchado, the procession that we saw in the images, those were the actual officials, or the images of actual officials to be there at the event.
그래서 의궤에 그려진 그 반차도는 그 실제 행사장에서 실무자들이 사용했던 확원 핸드스크롤이 선행되어 있다는 거를 항상 기억을 하셔야 되거든요. 그래서 그 현장에서 그러니까 아주 그 효율적으로 반차도를 놓고 줄을 세우거나 하기 위해서는 이쪽에서 봐도 되고 이쪽에서 봐도 되고 어느 쪽에서 봐도 편하게 쉽게 사용할 수 있게 그런 아이디어가 있었다고 생각합니다.
There's this idea that as mentioned at the actual event, all the officials were all they were given the hand scroll in advance, and they were supposed to know the procedure of it. But then at the actual event, when they look at when they refer to the scroll, the purpose was to see from whichever side that you look at it, that it is portrayed, depicted in that scroll. So this is for the purpose of the actual event that's taking place.
I'd like to add just a very practical point. If we think about book reading, we think about holding a book like this and reading. If we think about book reading, we usually imagine holding a book in this way and reading it this way. But you saw that Uyghur books are quite big. They're big and very heavy. So usually the books were placed on the table, like the maps. Yeah. So as Professor Park mentioned, they were supposed to be looked at it from above. So I think that took into consideration the viewing position of the reader, not as an individual reader, but as a group, who would actually enact the prescription, written on the pages.
Then my question is, if the drawings were used on site for instructional purposes, how would it be preserved so intact rather than cripples and tears, etc. If it was used actually on site to give an instruction to you stay here, you stay there, etc., then it must be very So I was surprised how intact it has been preserved.
Okay, let me explain that part. What Professor Park Jung-hye informed us was that beforehand they make some kind of drawing, but that's not what we see in the Uyghur books. So first of all, they make a copy for the approval of the king beforehand. And so if the king sees that everything is in order, 반차, which means rank positioned. So then after the completion of an event, all the records were taken, and then the painting, the 반차도, also was repainted for the book. And so Uyghur is not actually produced right after the event. Sometimes it takes several years. So like the 화성 citadel construction Uyghur, 화성 성역 Uyghur, the construction actually went on between 1795 to 6, but the Uyghur was produced in 1801. That's why it's so intact.
Hi, I'm Lee Talbot. I'm the curator of the George Washington University Museum and the Textile Museum. And so I'm interested in the objects that we see in the Uyghur. And so certainly they are a record of the types of objects that were used, but do we know, were they used as a reference for the creation of objects? Like, for example, if a crown prince is going to get married, do the artists who have to make the objects, do they look at the past Uyghur for guidance when they create a new set of objects?
I think we all agree that that was the case. So that was one of the purposes of the Uyghur. That's why they were recorded afterwards. So in order to record the proper preparation, ceremony, and so on of the event, including the awards of all the people who were involved as a model for future such events. I think that's what's the purpose.
So I have this about 20-page text for this. I was hoping that the organizers would produce a booklet collecting all our papers, but there was none. So my paper, I will just read one line out of the first page. Uyghur books were compiled with the intention that they be consulted, although not necessarily exactly followed, for similar later state events.
We'll upload up afterwards, because during the talk they shouldn't be reading. And before the talk, they should be reading, because they don't come then.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Yuan Kim. I came from the University of North Carolina, and my major is library science. As my major point, I just wanted to ask about the accessibility of Uyghur. Uyghur is written by the old type of language. I mean, it's not a modern Korean language. It's just combined with illustration with the Chinese character. So primary source is the Chinese character. So ordinary person cannot easily access to the Uyghur. They can, of course, they can easily understand the illustration and image. But I just wanted to know, the Uyghur is not translated the Korean, the modern language, or the English language. My second question is, how can I access to the detailed form of the Uyghur illustration? Is not available for the detailed form of the Uyghur illustration? So my first question is it translated by English or the Korean modern language? And second one is, let me know the source of the text, image, or illustration of Uigwe.
First of all, if you look at the text of Uigwe, it looks Chinese, but it does have a lot of Idu. Idu is a system of language which borrows Chinese characters, meaning as well as sound. And this language called Idu was invented during the Shilla period, but it was not really known to many people. So when I first started to study the text of Uigwe, I couldn't understand. I did study classical Chinese, but a lot of things did not make sense to me. But fortunately, at the Academy of Korean Studies, we have scholars who can guide me. So I had 2 dictionaries. There is such thing as Idu dictionary. So you can consult the dictionary and decipher the Uigwe text. It's not easy. So all of us had to really spend so many hours studying all these things. And also, during the late Joseon period, after the mid-19th century, there were Korean language versions, but only a very few of them. And also, it is because at the court, sometimes the court ladies had to read this because most of the banquet-related Uigwes are for palace ladies. There were only a few, I forgot the number. I've written a great deal about court banquet Uigwe in Korean. Only a few of the banquets were kings or emperors. All of them are for the palace ladies. So they had to understand what it is. So there are some Korean version Uigwes. But we don't, for us actually, the old Korean is even difficult, more difficult than reading Idu or Chinese.
Is there any website for the seeing and accessing the illustration of Uigwe?
There are a couple of Uigwe that are translated in vernacular Korean.
Okay. If you go into Kyujangak website, you can see all the Uigwe, some with the text written in plain Chinese characters, and also some Uigwes were translated into Korean, but not very many of them.
Due to lack of time, I think we would have to take our last question.
Yeah.
Professor Kim.
Actually, before I speak, Richard wants.
I'll just say one thing real quick. So I, as one of the co-conveners, I do want to apologize if there was a misunderstanding about the distribution of the papers. What we've found for 23 years is that when we have everybody's papers beforehand, then the authors come back and say, oh, but I benefited so much from the colloquium itself, and I learned so much from the other speakers, I would like to make changes. And so we will collect all the papers, as we've done for 23 years, after the colloquium, so you can make final revisions. And then we publish them in a series of working papers, which are then sent out to the authors and also the participants who have come to the audience. And we all applaud again privately. So.
Let me add to it. Actually, the reason we require you to send your papers is to make sure you are prepared. And Frank Hoffman, in fact, commented it's the only meeting where the speakers and discussants, this time we don't really have an official discussion, they were all so well prepared. So that was our hidden agenda. But anyway, my simple question is, if there was any similar attempt among the, Yangban, Sadega, or was it prohibited? Or was there any precedent before Uyghur became an institution?
Did you get the question? Why don't you answer?
I'm not sure how much we know about that. Do we know about precedents? You mean in Korea? In Korea, any? Well, on the visual side, I think we probably think that these Kehedo were some kind of previous format. But for Uyghur, the historical writing, we don't know, do we? And the problem is, of course, the loss of material in Korea, so it's very difficult to... Yeah, Chokpo are quite different, aren't they?
Chokpo is very different kind of document.
Yeah.
Were there any attempts to emulate?
I don't know. The only thing might be the picture albums with some records. 왜 저 있잖아요. 그거 얘기해.
Maybe also.
그 양반가에는 의계 다큐멘트 북은 없지만 그림으로 행사를 그려서 집안의 행사를 그림으로 기록으로 남기는 그런 커스텀은 있습니다.
I'm sure you all heard Professor Kimono's question. So what Professor Park said was that although there is no documents, like the Uyghur documents among elites, Yangban aristocrats during the Joseon dynasty, there were customs where they illustrated their rituals through painting. So it's different from Uyghur, which is institutionalized, but they have their private practice of drawing their rituals.
But it was not prohibited.
그래서 대표적인 예가 의령남씨 집안에 16세기부터 18세기까지 걸쳐서 5종류의 행사를 화첩에 모아서 집안의 보물로 전승시킨 예가 있습니다.
So one representative example would be from Uryong Nam's lineage, that from 16th to 18th century they have constructed illustrative documents of their family rituals. I think we are running out of time. So maybe we could continue the discussion through lunch. So thank you all. Thank you for. Let's leave our applause. Thank you very much.